Have you ever said to yourself, I died after a stroke, who I was, what I could do, who I am, died that day? I have. I have done that. I am Aaron Allen, and welcome to Stroke of Genius Podcast, Survivor Experience. In this podcast today, we are going to talk with clinical uh, phys- clinical psychologist, are psychologists or I Alan Simberg. I just my stroke brain just forgot him. I'm gonna have him introduce himself. We're gonna talk about the 5 stages of grief today, and I think it's gonna be really something that we need to hear as a community. So let me bring Alan on and introduce himself in just a minute. Hold on.
Welcome to the Stroke of Genius Show, Survivor Experience. Now, here's your host, Aaron Avila.
Well, good morning, Alan.
Good morning, Aaron. And also a quick good morning to Jan. She was saying hello to me in the chat.
Oh, okay, okay. If it's harsh, I really want everybody out there to realize the chat is for you. If the chat gets blown up or I get a lot of comments, I could bring down screen. Let me show you, Alan. So we can through our show see the comments come up live on screen. So look, Jan, say something. We got Courtney out there. We got Jan out there. Oh my God. We got lots of people out there. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. Alan, let's jump right into the 5 stages of grief. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, well, my name is Alan Simberg. I have a PhD in counseling psychology, but I am not a psychologist because I don't have the license of psychology. However, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and also licensed chemical dependency counselor. And also, I work with addictions quite a bit. And as a result of that, I have a self published book, Back to Living, which is about recovery from addiction. And I also have an e learning program that has a lot more information about how to recover from addiction. And basically, what that's about, it's really how to get your life back. The treatment programs focus on abstinence and how to stop using drugs or engaging in any kind of addictive behavior. My book and my program teach how to get back into life and how to manage life so that the stress doesn't lead the person back to their addictions.
But Alan, I want everybody to realize Alan's been doing this for over 50 years, if I remember correctly, right? You've been in practice for over 50 years, and he's willing to use his skills and his skill set and the experience to help us stroke survivors. So today we're going to be talking and dealing with the 5 stages of grief. And every stroke survivor, I've been serving stroke survivor community for 9 years. And I part who it was, what it was. Alan died that day. And every stroke survivor I know of died. But the real question is, what are we titled this podcast the 5 stages of grief. Who goes through those 5 stages? What triggers the 5 stages of grief, Alan?
Well, basically, the answer to your question, Aaron, is loss. Depending on how significant or how important that loss is to the person, will affect how they go through the stages of grief and also which stages maybe they tend to stay in longer than others and how long they actually stay in any of the stages of grief.
So you can stay. What I told you in the green room before the show, I have seen many stroke survivors seem to be stuck or stay in the. For me, it's been a journey. I've been through the 5 stages, and I want everybody to realize before we go into this in detail that 5 stages of grief are proven that a human being goes through these. But I want you to realize something. There's a beginning and an ending stage. That means you can find life after stroke, after you go through the 5th stage. You're free. You basically find freedom. The chains are broken. You no longer live in that state. So I want you, if you find yourself stuck or stopped in that state, everybody has had a stroke is in that journey of stages. But I guess what I want, don't get stuck. You could push through to the 5th stage and actually find life after stroke. So, Alan, could you please jump on it? I'm gonna let you go. You tell me all about the 5 stages of grief.
Okay. And then, of course, if you or anyone in the audience has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them as best as I can.
Okay.
Okay. So let's see. I think maybe a good place to start is for anyone who doesn't know it, going through the 5 stages of grief is not linear. In other words, a person doesn't go through the first stage and then the second stage and then the third stage. A person can go through the first stage, go to the third stage, go back to the second stage. And the other thing is, once a person feels reasonably resolved in any of those stages of grief, it doesn't mean that they're not going to go back to it. But of course, what most often would happen is as long as it was reasonably resolved, if they go back to any of the stages, the impact is not as strong the second time as it was the first time. And usually, people will go back to a certain stage of grief if it hasn't been resolved fully. Okay. So I think the next thing to keep in mind is whenever we meet a challenge of any kind, our thoughts contribute to our emotions, and our emotions contribute to our behaviors. So the way we think has a lot to do with how quickly and the degree to which we accomplish whatever goals we set for ourselves. Okay. So I'm going to just briefly go over the 5 stages, and then I'm going to address, in a sense, what each stage means and how to manage each stage. Okay. So for many of you, if not all of you, some of what I'm going to say may be a review, but I don't think that that's a problem. So basically, the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So when a person is in the denial stage, I'm going to give you an example of how a way a person will immediately react when they initially go into the denial stage. When someone hears bad news, let's say a medical diagnosis or the loss of a loved one, it's not unusual for the immediate reaction to be, oh no, that's actually a form of denial. The communication that's being made in that point is, no, no, that's not true. It can't be. So denial, although it does have a reputation of not being very helpful, actually it is helpful initially because it helps the mind of the person that's going through it to manage the change in their life as effectively as possible. It prevents them from facing everything all at once so that it doesn't overwhelm them. And the other thing to keep in mind about denial, which is a defense mechanism, is that all defense mechanisms are not conscious. So, in other words, a person doesn't decide, I'm not going to believe that. That's the mind's way of protecting ourselves. So, as strange as this may sound, probably the most effective way to get past the stage of denial is to do your best to accept what happened. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean at that moment or at that point in time that you have to do something about it immediately, but it's coming to terms with the reality of the situation. For any of you that may not have heard this saying, there's a saying, what we resist persists. So the longer we allow ourselves to stay in the stage of denial, the longer it remains. I hope that makes sense for everyone. The next stage is anger. It's almost self explanatory. Obviously, when we experience a loss, we get angry that that happened. One of the reasons for that is because as human beings, and we're all different, this what I'm going to say applies to each of us to varying degrees. We don't like change unless it's the change we want. When we get change that we don't want, it's almost like our world, even if it's only momentarily, it becomes chaotic and we can't tolerate it. What do you mean? So I'll give you kind of a simple example from life. For people, let's say, for example, you go to work and you go to work a certain way every day. You drive or you get driven a certain way. And then one day you go to work and there's a detour. It's not unusual in a certain sense to kind of feel a sense of panic, like, oh no, wait, how am I going to get to work? Now, there's lots of different ways to get to work, but at that moment, you're stunned by the change in the way you ordinarily get to work. So, with anger, there's also frustration, and it's also not unusual to experience either anxiety or depression. The next stage is called bargaining, but the bargaining, see, one of the things to remember is that the stages of grief are much more about the loss of a loved one, loss of a job. So, one of the things that I want to talk about is how this particular stage, especially bargaining, applies to having a stroke and how you manage your life and your thoughts after having a stroke. So, the bargaining stage, the way it applies to, let's say, for example, having a stroke, is you start thinking what's called what ifs. So, in other words, it's not unusual for people to feel guilty after they have a stroke. And, like, the thought might be, so what's there to feel guilty about? You had a stroke. Well, as everyone knows, no matter how well we take care of ourselves, there's always ways we can take better care of ourselves. So it's not unusual for individuals who've had a stroke to think, well, what if I didn't eat so poorly? What if, in other words, the person is thinking, maybe I caused this. There are things I could have done, maybe, that I wouldn't have had the stroke. And in a sense, that's also a subtle form of denial.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, it didn't have to happen. I made it happen. And that's not really true because, as all of you know, there are many people that are told, which is true, they're told they're in good health and then they experience, for example, a heart attack. So, in a certain sense, there's really no answer to how well you can take care of yourself to prevent with 100% certainty anything from happening. The idea is to take care of ourselves as best as we can, as consistently as we can, so we can have the best experience in life. But it's not a guarantee. The next stage is depression. Depression kind of goes along with the idea of what I just said about the guilt that some people may feel about not taking care of themselves as well as they could have, and then they caused themselves to have a stroke. Because depression, one definition of depression is anger turned inward. And when a person is depressed, that person feels hopeless, helpless, and overwhelmed. And there are several behaviors that go along with those feelings. So, for example, some of those behaviors are having trouble sleeping, whether it's trouble going to sleep or staying asleep, not wanting to be around people, isolating yourself. Really, to a certain extent, when that does not happen to an extreme over an extended period of time, isolating yourself in a sense, not completely, but isolating yourself to a certain degree is really very helpful because when you're in that stage of depression, everything can feel overwhelming to you. And when you isolate, in other words, you don't interact as often or as much with other people, you're really giving your mind and your body a chance to heal and not experience overwhelm, or at least decrease the degree to which you experience overwhelm. So, in a certain sense, there is a plus and a minus to everything that we experience. It's a question of being able to recognize it and knowing how to manage it. So, the way to manage depression initially, maybe accept it, recognize what you're going through, and identify what your symptoms are, and then identify a strategy for managing those symptoms. So, an example of that might be if you notice that you've been staying away from people a lot longer than is really very reasonable from your point of view, start interacting with people. It's difficult, but start interacting with people. Do your best not to think about not only your current circumstances, but also what people may be thinking about you. Whenever our functioning gets compromised in a certain way, the feelings and the thoughts we have about that can translate into us identifying or making up in our minds what other people are thinking about us. So, for example, one thought might be, oh, that person sees I'm handicapped, I'm disabled. Oh, they probably don't even want to talk to me. What they must think of me. No, no. Focus on being who you are and what you want to be. Because as you all know, everyone has an opinion. It does help to take into account what some opinions are, but it doesn't mean that you have to allow the opinion of others to either affect or overly affect you. And then the last stage is acceptance. Now, of course, acceptance doesn't mean, okay, great, so what? I had a stroke. So what? I can't do certain things that I used to be able to do. No, no, no. What it means is you're now at a point where you're exploring options on how you can have the best life possible. It's focusing on life as it is rather than overly focusing on what you no longer have. Because, in a sense, if we don't work through the stage of acceptance, we're handicapping ourselves. We're allowing our situation to adversely affect us unnecessarily. The idea is to work with the effects of the stroke, get past them as best as possible, and manage them as effectively as possible. And as strange as this may sound, do your best to be grateful for what you do have rather than focusing or over focusing on what you don't have. Because by focusing on what we don't have, that's one of the major contributing factors to depression. So that's pretty much, I guess I could also add, there are some general symptoms of grief. So I'll just go through some of them quickly. So crying, headaches, belief in God. Some people immediately start thinking they get angry with God or creator or Jesus or whatever belief, however you envision what God is, what creator is. They think like it's done to them and creator did it to them. And my belief is that part of the reason people, well, there's actually two reasons that I believe that happens. One is if we don't have a belief in something greater than ourselves, we sometimes lose hope in our lives. The other thing is, depending on the experiences we had in our upbringing, in a certain sense, we're programmed to believe in authority, authority having power over us. And what greater authority could there be than our creator, right? So, depending on what our views are of authority from parents, from our upbringing, we transfer unwittingly, we transfer them to our belief about creator. So if we believe that our parents were unjust and we're angry and we're not resolved about that, it wouldn't be unusual to think our creator is punishing. And my belief is that our creator is not punishing. Our creator is pure love, not romance, but pure love in the true sense of the word. Um, Feeling detached from life, not only people, but also feeling detached from life, and also engaging in certain behaviors that are not usual for you, something that's uncharacteristic. So let's say, for example, you're the type of person that never gets angry. You know, you never raise your voice. Well, maybe now you're tending to do that. But that's because of the effect of the experience of having a stroke and not being, as strange as this may sound, not being at peace about it, not accepting it. So accepting, again, it's not liking it, it's managing it and not letting it run you. So that's pretty much what I have to say about the stages of grief. I'd be happy either to answer any questions you have, Aaron, or if
Well,
anybody.
I do have a question. Could you repeat without just give me the 5 stages in order that they
Okay.
repeat that?
Okay. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Now, yeah, as you know, Alan, I've been serving the stroke community for 9 years. And when there are many stroke survivors that fight this process, they hold themselves hostage in depression, hold themselves hostage in detachment. But I want everybody to realize something out there that once you get through the first, second, third, fourth, fifth stage of grief, on the other side is freedom. It really is. I've been through the 5 stages of grief, there's no doubt. Still can't, like Alan said, go back a little bit now and then. But I want everybody out there that are listening to this podcast to realize that if you go through all 5 stages, like Alan said, resolve those, come to peace with those, that you will have freedom at the end. It's a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. It's here. Anyway, that's kind of. I want everybody to know that there's hope at the end of this. That once you get through this, there's life after stroke. And you've got to not fight this process of proven scientific fact, emotional fact, everybody that's experienced loss. And we as stroke survivors have lost a lot. But there is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Once you work through this process, and Alan, you are here to help. If someone needs help getting through this process of grief, how could they get a hold of you?
Well, you could either go to my website, which is, well, I actually have 2 websites, but the website to go to get in touch with me would be alansimberg.com, or more simply, you could either call me 281-785-0660. The website that has my book and my e-learning program is lifemastorywithalan.com. And my email is alan@alansimberg.com. So probably email or calling would be the quickest
So
way.
here's the phone number. Could you please repeat that phone number one more time?
Yes, it's 281-785-0660.
Okay, I cannot thank you enough for really giving your time out there for our stroke survivors, because I think these 5 stages, every stroke survivor I've ever met is in one of these stages. They're either new going through it or older going back to it, because I found myself, and you said that I felt like you were talking to me. Sometimes you revisit what you've gone through, and that's kind of what I found myself once while kind of slipping into depression and looking back what I lost, and I'd pull myself out of it, and it's where my focus is going. It's in the wrong place.
Mhm. I have to say something real quick, Aaron. To spell my last name, because I see that there's one little letter that's not the accurate letter. It's Simberg.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, Alan, we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for being here. And I encourage you, please, if you're out there, stroke survivor, non-stroke survivor, caregiver, if you like what we're doing out there, a Stroke of Genius podcast, please go to Stroke TV Media on YouTube and subscribe to our channel. It helps raise awareness, get our message out there. Alan, I want to thank you so much for being here. I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for having me on your show. And I also want to thank all the people that attended and for their comments as I've been expressing what I've been talking about.
All right. Well, sounds good, Alan. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Keep